And you have to do, you also have to do studies of nudes in art school, which is just part of the classical training in art. My brothers always wanted to know how far away I was from those nudes. They were teenagers at the time. But I really never have spent a lot of time on it. And in fact, if you go to my blog, you can see some of my paintings. I've never spent a lot of time doing representational art. In other words, to try and have this conversation, to see something out in the world and try to build that into it. It's always been this expression of a conversation that's taking part inside of me. And so the piece of art that was on the flyer, I wish I knew her then, I think that's the piece, is a conversation about these pictures of beautiful women from the 1960s Life magazine, and this conversation about beauty and who they were and who they are and who have they become, and playing with that kind of theme. So I did a lot of that. A lot of my work was very, very large. One of the reasons why it was not easy to do as I got older, because I needed a large studio to do the large art, and really quickly moved away from that. And so pieces hang in families' homes, or they exist under the beds now. But a number of years ago, I journeyed back to Mexico, and was just really moved by the light and the color and the play on the earth tones and the architecture, and just felt like I had to start painting again. And so I took some time and began to do it. I went back. Acrylics are very similar to watercolors, at least the way I use them, so I went right back to watercolors. I started at first by doing buildings, and thinking of that. If you look at some of Cézanne's work of towns and villages, without knowing it, I love Cézanne, by the way. But without knowing it, I was replicating very similar pieces, playing with the building structure and the light and things like that. So I started there, but then quickly moved into landscape, which I had never done before. And the landscapes, I've always considered myself a part of, or leaning heavily on, the abstract expressionists like Rothko. For the way in which I move, manipulate the paint on the canvas. And so even the watercolor is part of putting it on, lifting it off, smearing it, moving, playing. Very little brush stroke, actually, and much more of a manipulation of the paint. And so as I began to, and it began to come back to me, the work that I did very much resembled a flattening of the landscape, so that it was hard to tell what it was. You might have a sense that it was landscape, but it would draw you in. I mean, so it was but when you got up close, there were layers upon layers upon layers in that Rothko style of really translucent paints. And again, I find it interesting when people come up and where they react to the painting and they say, well, this one's a happy painting. And it's just amazing to me as they pick up the conversation. But what I will tell you is that what happens in art is that you're led to do what you do. You're not saying, oh, I'm going to do this. You're led to do it. It's a hard thing to capture in words. But it is to say that the painting itself dictates for me when I will paint, what I will paint, the subject of the painting. It dictates the colors that are to be used next. It dictates the amount of paint that's put on the painting. Everything is in this conversation. And I have yet to meet an artist who does not have that same kind of feeling. They say, yeah, well, I had the subject matter, but they begin to tell you that what's happening is really being led through this process. And again, I think very much speaks to the Spirit. I brought my latest piece. And the piece that I brought is some work that I was doing. My brother-in-law got married a year or so ago during bluebonnet season. I went out and we took a bunch of pictures in Chapel Hill, and have been playing with the themes that I saw in those pictures and putting them on the paper. And I'll be honest, right now I do not sell these. Most of these, if I can pry them out of Joanne's hands, they get given away and sold at auction to benefit different charities, which guarantees the price is always higher than they're probably really valued. But this is a piece from Chapel Hill. The piece itself comes after doing a piece that is about maybe 8 times larger than this on a very large canvas in watercolor, which is, and I had just a sense that I wanted to take it a little bit further. I was really beginning to get frustrated, and so this is egg tempera. So as you know, watercolors are a pigment that is hard, typically. Even if you get it in a tube, you squeeze it out and let it get hard. You don't use watercolors out of the tube wet. You're not supposed to. You let it get hard, and that's how you use the paint. And watercolor is a process of putting direct, pure pigment with gum and a couple of other substances. Sometimes the cheaper ones have a lot of acrylic in it, but it makes that's the binder. But I was feeling like I couldn't get the texture and the lift off the paint that I really wanted to as this conversation was going on. And so I decided I would try egg tempera. This is on a panel. You do egg tempera on a panel. I've learned the hard way. This is the first one that I did, and it's on a panel that has texture to it already, which didn't bother me, but I've since learned that I would have an easier time on a panel that doesn't have texture. So that's what's sitting at home right now. What you do is you take the pigment itself, which is powdery, right? It's just pure pigment, gets absolutely everywhere. And you take a small portion of it and you put it in a little bowl. This is the oldest form of oil paint, by the way. And it is what is used for icon painting. And what you do is you take an egg and you separate the yolk from the egg, and you wash it all off and get all of that, and so you're left with this egg yolk. I do it, there are lots of ways to do it. I do it in my hand, and then you plop it on a towel and you dry it so that it's, I didn't know you could do this, by the way. It's fascinating to learn this. So you dry the egg yolk. So you have this egg yolk just sitting there, and then you can pick up the egg yolk. And I don't know if you do this. The egg yolk has a skin itself. You think of the egg has that whole kind of thing, but once you get rid of the white, the egg yolk itself has a skin. And so you pick up the egg yolk by the skin, which is like magic. I'm just telling you. Just anytime you just like, ooh, look at what I'm doing. I'm so excited. And then you poke a hole in the bottom and you drain out the oil. You mix it with water, half water, half yolk, and that's your pigment. And then you add your colors to it. So this is what this is. It's Andrew Wyeth is probably one of the finest egg tempera painters from our American tradition in our current history. And so I want to invite you to come look at it after we're finished with our time. But it's an interesting process. At the end of it, you cover it, and so it gets